Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and I am here once again to talk about something I haven't talked about in a while, the opening to one of the Fallout games. I had already done the openings to Fallout 76, the original Fallout, and Fallout 2. So today we are doing the opening of Fallout 3. Let's hop into this. Now, the screen starts up. It is black and it starts to fade in. As it fades in, you hear sparking as the cathodes light up, and we hear the song "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" by the Ink Spots. I don't want to set the world. You know, if you've ever played the game, you'll recognize it. As you know, the cathodes light up, you hear that sparking, and they finally light up fully. And we're playing that "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire." Now, the camera draws back, and we get a better view of the radio, which is a brand we are familiar with if we remember the original Fallout. The TV was the same brand. So we know they made in the pre-war, they made radios and they made TVs. Radiation King. And on top of the radio, we do see a hula dancer dancing. And this is all while "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" continues to play. Yeah, you have the hula dancer with the ukulele. Exit full screen, please, so we can, yeah, make sure. All right. Now, we've seen the inside of the radio. It's drawn out. The song "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" is now playing. And you see this little ornament on top of the radio, which is a hula girl. Grass skirt, ukulele in hand. Now, we go a little further. The camera continues to draw back even further, and we now see that it is some form of public transportation, because you do see a driver's seat with a steering wheel, and behind him you see like a little cage in with seats to sit in. The first seat, we see a tool chest, we see whiskey bottle. The camera continues to draw back. And like I said, you see the empty tool case, or not, we don't know if it's empty or not, but we see the empty whiskey bottle. We see the tool case. And the seat itself is empty. And we see in the next seat, it's empty as well. And there's a toy truck, a toy Nuka-Cola truck, and a teddy bear, indicating that there were families, kids that rode this form of transportation. as well as, your daily workers. And since we have seen that, um, the camera begins a pan upward, um, while it continues to go back. And so above the seats, we see these broken out windows, but above them, boom, we see posters. Lend a hand for Uncle Sam. Enlist today. And the other one is a brighter future underground, a Vault-Tec poster. Reserved now. But like I said, we do see the broken and shattered windows as we go further back. So while the front of the bus is intact, notice the windows are not broken, they're not shattered in the front. The first couple, as you go back, are not. It's only when you get further back you see broken and shattered, giving you a hint as to what's coming. You see a suitcase on a shelf in the bus. We see a Nuka-Cola bottle in the floor. Potentially another type of cola bottle. We see several cola bottles, as a matter of fact. We see empty in the seats, in the floor. Let's continue along here. And boom. We start our withdrawal from out of the bus. We realize it is not a full bus. It is broken. And it slowly pulls back to reveal a broken down version of Washington, D.C. And the song at this point, which has been playing, is now echoing and fading as if it was in a tunnel, as if the bus was a tunnel from a long ago age to what is now. And we hear the creaks and the wind as we witness this decimated view of Washington, D.C. And we start hearing a music overtake the song by the Ink Spots as it fades out. And ominously building music starts to overtake it. We look at the background. We see power poles. We see billboards on these buildings. One on the right for the Corvega, and then there's another on the left. I'm not sure what that's for. It's hard to see. But you can barely see it above the building. And on that same left side, there's also the picture. Well, it's not a picture, but it's a statue designed for the side of the building. A very Gothic architecture type look, as it's a figure of a woman leading out slightly from the building. But what really gives us the clue, this is Washington, D.C., as we look out at all these damaged and ruined buildings, is standing in the center of the screen as it's flanked on both sides, is the Washington Monument, this giant stone obelisk. And you notice it's missing chunks. It has been decaying almost, as if it were living. And the buildings, the rubble, yeah. Now, we pull back a little further. Still, you see the wind blowing the dust around. And finally, the screen moves to the left and you see them. You see a figure in power armor holding a laser rifle. And at this point, the song "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" by the Ink Spots has disappeared fully, and the ominous music finally crescendos as the figure turns to look at us, as if to say, this is the result. This is what we have to fight over. And the screen fades to black. No real music, but you hear background sounds that remind us of decay and rubble. And the words Bethesda Game Studios presents fades in. And then they fade out. And the screen is again blank for a moment before the words Fallout 3 appear on the screen. And they disappear as the screen remains black. So yeah, we finally get notice of the game we are playing, Fallout 3. Now, with a still black screen, we finally hear the series tagline. War. War never changes. The screen remains black through the beginning of the next line until we get towards the end of the line. Let me play this. There we go. Once we get to the end of the line and we are greeted with the fade in of an image of a skeleton on the ground. What do we see? We see, looks like chest bones and a skull. Perhaps, is that shoes? beside the skull? I'm not certain. But then we see rocks and dirt. All we know is that it is the remains of a human figure. The lines that play during this say, "Since the dawn of humankind, when our ancestors first discovered the killing power of rock and bone, blood has been spilled in the name of everything." At that point, the images change. They change from the picture of the skeleton to a graveyard. Most likely Arlington Cemetery, since the game is in the DC area. That's what I'm assuming it's meaning to represent is Arlington Cemetery. And you see the lineup of all the the tombstones with the trees around it, and a light just turning everything in the background to white. And our narrator continues, "From God to justice to simple psychotic rage." And then again, we fade to black. And we hear, "In the year 2077. Fading back in with a new image from the black screen. We see a rising mushroom cloud in the background, while in the foreground we see a neighborhood. We see it turned over tricycle, soda bottles, neighborly houses, fire hydrants, little baby carriage, the trees, the white picket fences. All of it very iconic of this idea of a wonderful suburban life. Meanwhile, in the background, we just see that mushroom cloud grow with the trees moving back and forth from the impact of the wind released from the mushroom cloud. And we hear, after a millennia of armed conflict, the destructive nature of man could sustain itself no longer. The world was plunged into an abyss of nuclear fire and radiation. And once again, the screen fades to black. Now, a new image fades in. Instead of the bright and beautiful neighborhood, perhaps a cul-de-sac, we see the aftermath of that mushroom cloud. Rubble, destruction, devastated architecture. And the music grows more definitive as we continue to hear from the narrator. But it was not, as some had predicted, the end of the world. And we see a fade out and fade in transition to a new image. A broken rail system with rail cars seemingly falling off, and more rubble, more decimation. And again, and now we hear, instead, the apocalypse was simply a prologue of another bloody chapter of human history. So, once again, the screen does another fade transition, fading out from one image into another. And we see a section of street in the city. There's a wrecked bus to the side, crosswalk signs. You know, this was clearly a busy sidewalk or intersection. We see ruined buildings as they're falling apart, scaffolding that have since lost their outer shell. And our narrator tells us once more, or tells us now, for man had succeeded in destroying the world, but war never changes. So once again, we hear that thought out tagline. And the shaky image fades to black. From the black screen, we fade into a new image of what appears to be a former schoolyard or playground. I'm assuming a schoolyard because you have the swing set, and it looks like in the very foreground you could see fences that would have kept children in and other people out. And you see the brick building in the background that we can perhaps assume is a school, even looking at the door of the building. So I'm assuming this is probably a schoolyard playground. But you see the swing set, and I'm not sure what that is on the left. It's hard to tell. And like I said, in the foreground you do see the fence because the camera is drawing away. We again fade to black and transition to a new image. It is an image of a broken down home. And then the camera draws in to a billboard in the foreground. Vault secure, the billboard says, and on it it has an image of the Vault Boy on the right side. And he's standing out from a vault built into the side of a mountain. With a long line of people heading into that mountain. You see, Vault-Tec really wanted to advertise himself as this savior of humanity. And looking at the long line on the billboard, we know, as of having played the games, how much of a lie that is. They didn't care about preserving humanity that much. You know, there were only 120 some vaults. I forget the exact number, but it's 120 something. Um, and only, what was it? It wasn't that many. I don't think there was more than 20 vaults, 21 vaults that were just test vaults, that were little control vaults. You know, simply there to preserve. But that's the key word, control. Because the other vaults were experiments. If you've ever done scientific testing, you know you need control samples. And that's what these vaults were to the scientists and engineers at Vault-Tec. And so these other vaults were the key vaults. And so they weren't going to let all these people in to save lives. It was experimentation. But in the background, we see the nuclear bombs going off. It's like, oh yeah, this we'll provide you security. Vault secure. Now, the narrator picks back up. In the early days, thousands were spared the Holocaust by taking refuge in enormous underground shelters known as vaults. And the camera continues to focus. It tightens in on that billboard as we see the image, and then it fades out with another image to fade in. And we hear from the narrator, but when they emerged, they had only the hell of the wastes to greet them. And so we see in the background, in the foreground, you see the rocks, the dead trees, you know, the irradiated ground. It's hard to believe there's any life there. And in the far back, you see broken down, I'm going to assume it's overpasses or bridges. But yeah, you notice the trees are dead. They're just blackened, upright logs at this point. No leaves, no life. You see a few tufts of grass or weed but the ground is mostly mud and rock. So the screen once again fades out as another image fades in. And it's a different image of wastes. Nope. Hold on. My player wasn't wanting to work with me here. Oh, there we go. And we see more dirt and rock. The lifeless husks of trees. Again, it's hard to imagine any life here. What was once a metropolitan hub of Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area in Maryland and Virginia. But this is to counter the idea, as busy, as active as that place was, there's nothing here. It really is a wasteland. It's just wild and barren. But we hear from the narrator, all except those in Vault 101. And so the screen fades to black, and then we get a fade in. What fades in is we see the outer frame for the door to Vault 101. We see the controls on the outside. We see the door closing mechanism. And that great steel door rose into place. 101. The mechanism grabs it and pushes it forward, and we hear it being pushed forward and see how tight the door fits, because you can hear it pushing against its against the cogs of the door, pushing against the spot it's meant to fit in, so tight to keep out the radiation, to keep out anything that could hurt the denizens, the citizens of the vault. And we hear from the narrator as the image draws out, for on that fateful day, when fire rained from the sky, the giant steel door of Vault 101 slid closed and never reopened. It was there you were born. It is here you will die. Because in Vault 101, no one ever enters, and no one ever leaves. And so the vault door has finished closing, and the camera has drawn out, and we see the cave that Vault 101 was in. And that's the end, the opening of Fallout 3. That gives us a full examination of the opening to Fallout 3. We have Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4 left. I will try to get them in time, but that's going to be it for now. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. I forgot what I was going to say. If anybody tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.